Hello, I'm Maria Noel Groves, owner of Wintergreen Botanicals and clinical herbalist. Today we are going to make cordials and oxymels, and these are a really fun herbal remedy. They're not quite as medicinally potent as tinctures and teas would be, but they're kind of a nice special treat. And so in the case of a cordial, really it's a lot like a tincture. It's an alcohol extract of the herb, except the differences are that you use a lot less plant material, so it's not as potent, but it's usually a little bit more tasty. You usually will be adding sugar, so again, making it more tasty. The alcohol percentage is usually going to be a little bit less, but you need to make sure it's still good enough, strong enough to preserve your product. And then your dosage is usually different. So instead of having your dropper full or so of a tincture, with a cordial, you're going to usually have either like a 1 or 2 ounce shot glass, or maybe a cordial, or you can even add a splash of seltzer water to it and make it into more like a cocktail. And so these are fun. You can treat them as alcoholic beverages. You can treat them as medicine. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on the more medicinal side of things, but I'm going to show you how to make the more fun beverage cordials too. And then we're going to talk about oxymels, which are a honey vinegar base as opposed to a sugar alcohol base. So we're going to start off by making our simple syrup, and that is typically the sweetener of choice for making a cordial. And also sometimes you'll come across simple syrup concepts when you make herbal syrups too. And so you can use other sweeteners, but we're going to start off with the simple syrup. Simple syrup, we're usually going to do it 2 to 1. That's what I usually do. 2 cups of sugar, and 1 cup of water. And I'm doing half cups as opposed to full cups so that I don't make tons and tons of simple syrup, because I really don't need that hanging around the house. And so you're going to put that in your pot and bring it to a gentle simmer and just mix it until your sugar dissolves and everything becomes clear again. Yes, I'm using junky white sugar, and actually for most of your simple syrups, it's better to use junky white sugar. It has it's better preserved than if you used organic, less refined sugar, and also it comes out a more pure, clear flavor, and so it'll show off the flavor and color of your herbs and your fruits or whatever you're putting in better than the other ones. The other ones will come out more brown in the end, and they'll also have a little bit of a caramel flavor. So sometimes that goes okay with your flavors, but usually you kind of actually want that more junky, simple syrup, really clear syrup flavor. And so in this case, we're going to use that. I will show you a couple other alternatives if you just really don't want to have white sugar in your kitchen at all. There are ways around that. But for a lot of things where you really want to show off that flavor, the simple syrup made with white sugar will do that. So we're just going to stir that around and let that do its thing. And while we're doing that, we're going to start prepping our herb. And there is still snow outside right now. It's the first day of spring here in New Hampshire, but we still have at least a foot of snow on the ground, so we don't have a whole lot of fresh herbs to choose from, but I do have some fresh frozen lemongrass from my garden from previous year, and so we're going to snip that up and we'll do our fresh herb. And if I had fruits, you can make it with fruits too, or just fruit, or a combination of fruit and herbs. For those, I usually kind of loosely fill the jar, anywhere from 1/2 to full with our fruits and herbs and things. So you can really play around with it. With lemongrass, it's pretty potent, so we're going to chop it up and put it in our jar, and that'll be good enough. So I'm just going to chop that up while our simple syrup is melting down. And if you didn't want to use regular sugar, what you could use instead would be honey, and you would use it in equal proportions as your simple syrup, or maple syrup. So those are other good options. In fact, we are going to do another cordial with maple syrup, and we're going to do our oxymel with honey, so you'll get a kind of a feel for those. But first we're going to do the traditional. And we have a lemongrass cordial that's already made, and you can see it's nice and clear and happy. It's got a little bit of yellow color from the lemongrass, a little yellowish greenish color, and there's really no color that's been contributed from the simple syrup because it's clear once it has dissolved. And once you've got your simple syrup, you can use it for other things. I mean, if you want to make soda, kind of a bad word in the herbal community, but if you want to make your own homemade sodas, you can use seltzer water and your simple syrup and some flavorings and make that. You can use it for other recipes too. You can use it to sweeten your coffee instead of sugar until you use it up. It should last for several weeks, possibly a month, in the refrigerator, or you can freeze it for longer. But I try not to make too much because, you know, nobody should really be eating that much sugar. And for that reason, cordials really aren't the healthiest remedy out there because they are sugar and alcohol, and we're not supposed to eat too much sugar or drink too much alcohol. And that's why this tends to be more of a treat. Another thing I sometimes do with my leftover simple syrup is I might continue to boil it until it gets to kind of like a hard crack state and make lollipops with the leftovers. And it turns it into a hard candy, and maybe throw a little vanilla extract to flavor it. Again, fun, not healthy. So we're getting there, but I still see some of those grains of sugar, so we're going to let those do their thing. We've got our herb ready to go. And then we have our alcohol. And our alcohol, in the case of making cordials, we're usually going to be working with 80 proof alcohol, not 100 proof alcohol, not ethanol, which is 190 proof. You usually want a nice drinkable alcohol, something that you would enjoy the taste of. This isn't the time to pull out the cheapest vodka you can buy. Save that for making tinctures. In this case, we want to enjoy our cordial. We're making it so that we can drink it and enjoy it. And so, that down just a little bit more. And so I've got Absolute, which is good. A lot of times I like to work with our locally made vodka. We have one that's made by Apple Hill Farm apples made at Flag Hill Winery, and they distill it into vodka. And so it's local apples made into local vodka. It's really nice quality. It's about 2 to 3 times more expensive than this is, but it really is quite delicious. And so that's one that's my favorite, but I don't happen to have any of it today. So we're just going to use Absolute, which is still good. But the best quality liquor you can afford to do for your recipes is usually best. Let me stir it. We're getting there. And vodka is generally preferred because it really shows off the color and the flavor. It's kind of a very pure, clean alcohol, which is the same reason why we tend to use vodka for tinctures. It really highlights whatever else you want to highlight. However, a lot of herbalists will also use brandy. And we'll be using that in one of our other recipes because the flavor of brandy and the color of brandy will complement that particular blend. And you can use any kind of alcohol, really, but just know that whatever flavors and colors your alcohol has are going to impart on your final product. And for this one, I really just want that lemongrass to shine through. It's just going to be a sweet, alcohol-y lemongrass, which is really delicious. And we're just about there. I think we're good enough. I'm just going to pour it in. And this, sometimes you'll find that the sugar gets hardened on and you think, like, how am I ever going to clean that off? But once it gets hot water on it, it actually cleans up really, really easily. So you don't need to worry about a big mess to clean up. And so we've got our alcohol, we've got our simple syrup. If you were using maple syrup or honey, you just treat it the same exact way. And you're going to want to do about 1 part simple syrup and then the rest alcohol. And you can adjust it a little bit, but the thing you want to be careful of, you want at least 20 to 25% alcohol in your final product. And the proof of your alcohol, if you divide that in half, that's what percentage it is. So this is 80 proof vodka, which means it in itself is 40% alcohol. Now, if we did that 50-50 with our simple syrup, then our liquid would actually only be about 20% alcohol. So we'd be cutting it close. Plus, especially, I mean, there's a little bit of fresh juice in this lemongrass because it is fresh frozen lemongrass. But if you were using like strawberries or peaches or something that was really juicy, you're going to get even more water into your final solution from that. So that's why I say if you do 2/3 alcohol and 1/3 simple syrup, there's a pretty good bet that you'll be at the 20% or higher in the end. If you used a really low proof alcohol, you'd have to use more of it. But most of our liquors that we tend to make these things with are 80 proof or 40%. So I also usually add the sugar first because it's displaced a little bit, and so that also kind of works in my favor too. So I'm going to fill that up. You could pre-mix, so you had, you knew exactly that you had, 2/3 of the vodka and 1/3 of this, and then you just poured that in. If you really wanted to be exact. In herbalism, we don't really need to be perfectly exact. We just need to be good enough. I'm just going to throw a little bit more in. So we've got our simple syrup, and then I'm going to add our vodka. And I like to fill things to the tippity top, at least as close as possible. And what that does is that means there's going to be very little space for your fresh materials to pop out and get funky in the airspace on top. And for this, you can use any kind of lid, preferably tight lid. And so that's pretty close to the top, and then just kind of give it a shake. Mix all the ingredients up. If you're using honey, you kind of have to shake. As you'll see when we do the Oxymel, you have to shake for a lot longer. Or you can kind of heat up the honey a little bit first so that it melts in a little bit more easily. And so you can leave this on your counter and someplace where you're going to remember, and give it a shake every day, twice a day, whatever you're feeling like. If you're working with strawberries or peaches or something that gets funky really fast, you're going to want to shake it a couple times a day, because as soon as, even if there's not much airspace, you'll get those, they rise to the top and you'll see them start to oxidize, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to keep shaking it so that you're mixing things up. For something like lemongrass or your dry herbs that we're going to work with in a little bit, it's less pertinent that you shake it every single day, but you want to shake it, mix it up, get the material going, get everything in contact with your simple syrup and your alcohol, and let it do its thing. And I would taste it, especially if you're making your cordial for fun and for flavor, and especially if you're working with fresh fruits. Taste it every day, and you may find that within 1 or 2 days it's ready to go. It's delicious. And so if that's the case, then you can just strain it out, and we'll strain something out towards the end so you can see how that's done. But really, you just pour it through a strainer. It's pretty simple. If you need to squeeze, you can squeeze it out. And strain it out, store it in a glass container. I've got this little one here that's ready to go. When this is done, it should just about fit in there. And then I put it in a cool, dark, dry spot, like in your liquor cabinet, and you're good to go. This should stay shelf stable for at least a year, usually several years, but after a year it might start to lose its fresh flavor. And for things like strawberries and peaches, they're great to make cordials with. They may not stay fresh that long. They might start to kind of go off after that. But with the alcohol percentage being 20% or higher, it shouldn't really go bad. You just lose some of those flavors. So that is our lemongrass cordial, and we're going to make a couple other ones. Just put this stuff back here. This is one, we're not going to actually make this one today, but this is my spiced maple cordial, and you'll see it has a very dark color. This was made with vodka, but it's made with maple syrup instead of with simple syrup. And I simmer fruits and spices in with the maple and just a little bit of water just so I have something to simmer in, and then pour all that into a container and then cover that with vodka. And usually within 1 day or so, it's ready to go. And you can find this recipe out and about. I've got it online, so you can find my spiced maple pear cordial recipe. But you can see that dark is just from the maple syrup and from the fruits, the pears and the spices. So the other one we are going to make, that is a cordial, is going to be a little bit more medicinal. And we're going to be making a heart cordial. That is also tasty. And so this would be a nice little, in lieu of dessert, in lieu of your alcoholic beverage, you have this, and this is your dessert and your alcoholic beverage together after dinner. And we're going to do a combination. We have some hawthorn berries, which are great heart tonic, and they extract quite nicely in alcohol. We have cocoa nibs, so chocolate, and that's a great heart tonic too, and it adds nice chocolatey flavor that blends well with the fruits and the vanilla. We have some rooibos, which most of us think of as making tea with it, and it's kind of a fruity flavored tea. It's not actually made with fruit, but it's a really nice non-caffeinated high antioxidant plant that has been shown to be helpful for hypertension and cholesterol. So we can throw that one in, and then because vanilla is wonderful, we're going to snip a little bit of vanilla bean. And almost any cordial does nicely with a little bit of vanilla bean. I work with vanilla beans quite a bit. And then we have our container that we're going to put it in. And so I'm just going to kind of eyeball. And with dry herbs, usually you'll go either fill it about a quarter to maybe 1/3 full. But you could go more, you could go less. You're really just playing around with it. Keep notes, and that way, if you find something you really love, you know how to make it again. And if you find something you really hate, you know not to do that again. But with the sugar, most things taste pretty good when you're done. So we've got the rest of those hawthorn berries. We'll throw probably like a teaspoon or so of rooibos. It's a nice plummy, kind of like a mild black tea sort of flavor, but there is no caffeine in it. Some cocoa nibs, and this could get a little bit bitter as time goes on, so you're going to want to be careful about that. That's another reason you want to taste your cordials periodically, because some of the spices and some of the stronger, more bitter flavors will get a lot more potent as time goes on, and you may find that, in the case of like my maple spice pear cordial that the cinnamon that I put in it completely overpowers all the other flavors if I let it sit for more than a day or two. Cardamom is another spice I put in that one, and if I let it sit for more than a couple days, it's all cardamom and cinnamon. You can't taste anything else. So that's something you're going to want to be a little bit cautious of with the cocoa nibs, is that it doesn't turn into a bitter cocoa mess by the end. So taste it. As soon as it tastes really yummy, strain it out. Some people will keep their cordials for a year before they strain it out, but in most cases I find a couple days to maybe a month is fine. It won't go bad in that it's bad for you, but it just may not taste as good if you let it go as long. And then we've got our, so probably maybe not quite a teaspoon of our cocoa nibs, and then vanilla bean. Kind of reminds me of strawberry shortcake dolls as a kid. And except better. We'll snip maybe about a quarter of a vanilla bean. And I love adding vanilla bean to all sorts of things, but I really love adding them to tea as well. So we've got our herbs in there. Is there anything else? I think that was everything. So not even quite a quarter of the way, but I think that's going to be fine. And then we're going to cover it with maple syrup in this case. So I've got some nice local, even organic maple syrup from North Family Farms. And I'll do about 1/3, give or take. And then hopefully I have enough here. I have more brandy elsewhere if needed. That's good enough. And these, because they're dried herbs, I don't have to worry quite so much about them going off at the top, as long as I shake them periodically. And again, just put it someplace where you'll remember about it. Put a label on it so you remember what it is, and the date is always nice. I like to put the date that I started it and the date I strained it, so I remember for future reference. And what's in it is nice to know, but at least a title. I have some things called like Choco Love Cordial that I've done at classes and didn't put a label on it, and I taste great. I have no idea what was in it. I can guess, but I don't know everything that was in it. So it's always good to put labels on things, because you probably won't remember everything later on. At least that's what I find. You can use your organoleptics to taste it and see if you can identify, but it's harder than you would think. And then last but not least, we are going to make our Oxymel. And so for this is for the folks who've been saying, ugh, like the sugar, the alcohol, I don't want that. And of course, you can always just make tinctures. Those are medicinal. Tinctures are nice and medicinal, but these are a great alternative, I find, especially to syrup. So if you really are kind of thrown off by that high sugar remedy, and in this case, you know, we're going to do one that's kind of like an elderberry syrup recipe, but instead of using alcohol, I usually use alcohol and honey and water as my base of my simple syrup so that it's shelf stable. Some people don't want the alcohol in their elderberry syrup, and if you don't use the alcohol, it's no longer shelf stable. In this case, we're going to use vinegar and honey, no water, and it's relatively shelf stable. It's even better if you keep it in the refrigerator, but you can keep it for a little while on the shelf without issue if you were traveling or something like that. And so we're going to use a slightly higher percentage of herbs on this one. It's a little bit more medicinal. And so I have some elderberries. That's our primary immune tonic, great for fending viruses out of your body, keeping you protected from them, make it so that they can't get into your cells and replicate. And also high in antioxidants and all that too. With elderberries do contain some mild nauseating and moderately toxic compounds, or mildly toxic compounds, especially nauseating. But if they're dry and if you strain them out and don't eat the seeds, it's generally not an issue at all. And when they're properly prepared, elderberry products are very safe for children, they're safe for elders. I don't even know offhand of any herb-drug interactions. There may be some, but it's generally really safe and well tolerated. I'm going to throw some schizandra berries in here too. And schizandra is a 5-flavor fruit because it's simultaneously sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and pungent, which means it has a very balancing effect on the body. It's a great liver tonic. And then also it does have some immune and liver supportive properties too. So it's a nice adjunct. You don't have to use it. This one sometimes is a little bit harder to find. It's definitely a more potent flavor. But when you add something sweet, like honey, and add something sour like vinegar and our other herbs that we're putting in, the bitter and pungent and salty flavors kind of get covered up a little bit, so it's not quite so bad. I love to make a tea that is very similar to this, except instead of rose hips, I end up using hibiscus, which is a nice sour red, and it's a delicious tea. And no vinegar on my tea, but honey, lots of honey. And then last but not least, we have our rose hips, which are high in vitamin C and bioflavonoids. It makes it a really nice supportive for the immune system. And so this is really basically an immune system tonic. You can fill these guys up to the, like, almost to the top and cover them up. But what I find is when you go to strain it out, there's almost nothing left. You strain it out and you've got a few tablespoons of syrup and all these dregs. And so, you know, up to about maybe halfway full, if that, so that you at least get some nice liquid out. And then we're going to put the vinegar in first, in this case, not the honey, because honey is so thick, it's really hard to get everything all mixed up in there. So it's going to be easier if we pour the vinegar in first so that it has a chance to cover. And about 50-50. Or to taste. If you didn't want it to be quite as sweet or you wanted it to be sweeter, it would be perfectly fine to add more. And if you're using vinegar, I generally prefer to use the raw apple cider vinegar. If you're using honey, I have, you know, raw organic local, actually this one's not organic, but raw local honey. And it doesn't have to be raw, but you do get extra benefits if it's raw. And whenever you're working with vinegar, you want to use plastic caps. Vinegar will eat through metal caps and will turn black and gross, and who knows what's getting into your extract when that gets into it. So you always want to use plastic caps. And these caps are not perfect seals. They're pretty tight, but it'll still dribble a little bit. So be aware of that. You can use wax paper and put that underneath your lid. Sometimes I find that even with the wax paper, it still starts to break down the metal lids. So I just use plastic. But some people who don't ever want to use plastic, I don't like using plastic, but sometimes I'm okay with it. And so you just shake it up. It'll take a little while to actually, the honey, you can't tell from your vantage point, but the honey is still kind of clumped up inside. And so it may take a while of, you know, shaking and letting it sit and shaking and letting it sit. Otherwise, the honey just kind of settles down to the bottom. And then once you're ready to go, you can strain it out. And so I've got one here that we can strain out. Just a little itty bitty demo jar that I did in a previous class back in October. So it's been sitting for a while. More than ready to come out. And this one had a higher percentage of herbs. So you'll see that we're actually not going to get a whole lot out of our final product. And I should have a spoon. We'll use this spoon. So you can use a jelly bag, especially if you have a lot. You can use a jelly bag and then just squeeze out as much as you can, especially for something like this where you do have a lot of material that gets caught up with your liquid and you want to get it out. With something like, you know, these nice sort of stick-like lemongrass, you're not going to get that much more if you squeeze out, so you can just put it through the strainer. We are going to put it through the strainer, but we're going to use the spoon to kind of scoop. And of course, we're on a micro scale here. You can use bigger ones, bigger strainers, bigger containers. And so we've got some that just came out, but we're going to push. Push, push, push. And then store it in a glass container, ideally. If you've got vinegar in it, you're going to want to store it with a plastic cap on it. And just store it in a cool, dark, dry spot, kind of like your cordials. You can put them in the liquor cabinet. They'll definitely be better off either in dark glass or in a cabinet so that the light doesn't oxidize it, especially if you want it to kick around for a while. Or these you could keep in the refrigerator. I've had some Oxymels go off within a couple months, and I've had others stick around for a couple years without refrigeration. So it really seems to be very haphazard to the ingredients. And so if you're not sure, you can always just store it in the refrigerator, and it should last for close to a year if it's in the refrigerator. But you could keep it on the counter for at least a little while. It's just going to really vary from Oxymel to Oxymel. And then your dose for this is usually a spoonful, like a teaspoon to a tablespoon, and you could mix this in with a little bit of water or hot tea and make something kind of like a switchel beverage, which is a honey vinegary type beverage, and then you've got the herbs in there as well. And so it's a bit of an acquired taste, but a lot of people do find that they like them. So those are our 3 remedies, well, really 2 remedies. We made 2 different kinds of cordials and 1 oxymel. And so I definitely recommend playing around with it, but keep in mind that these aren't the most medicinal remedies. They're really more fun than anything else. I taught a class, and afterwards one of my students said, "Oh, these cordials taste so much better than my tinctures. I'm going to stop making tinctures and just make cordials with everything." And it's like, well, these are fun remedies. These are something to enjoy a glass of at your herbal gathering or your next dinner party, or, maybe just have a little bit of after dinner, but it's not, your day-to-day, 3 times a day medicine kind of remedy. Maybe the oxymel, but not the cordials. So happy herbal adventures. I'd love to hear how it goes for you. Take care.